So your name is?
Mary Bennett Coleman now.
K-O-M.
M-E-N.
Yes.
Coleman.
And your maiden name?
Bennett.
B-E.
E-N-N-E-T-T.
And where and when were you born?
I was born in Anacortes, Washington, in November 30th of 1923.
23.
What? She's an old chick now.
Well, the women just get better with age. Us men, we don't do very well with age. I can tell you that.
No, we deteriorate.
What? So, your childhood, was that in Anacortes or Bellingham? Or?
No, my father was in the Coast Guard, and he was in the World War I Navy fireman, and then he came in 1924, joined the Coast Guard, and he was stationed in Anacortes doing rim running days. Those was when the liquor was, you know. So we left there in they broke the base up there due to depression because the Coast Guard's under the Treasury Department, and they had their money, so they put half of the men in Port Angeles and the other half of us in San Pedro, California. So we went to San Pedro and stayed there until 1935, and he was discharged with a medical. In 1927, he slipped on the deck of one of the picket boats and broke his back. In those days, it didn't do. And he got arthritis, so he couldn't. So he got out in 1935. We came to Bellingham to live. He was a mechanic.
Do you remember as a little girl what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Yes, I knew exactly what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a nurse.
And was that common for women of that time, of girls? Was that?
Well, I don't know. We all had dreamy ideas, I think. My sister wasn't, she didn't have anything. She wanted to get married and have a bunch of kids. But, and my brother is a consultant here, and was in Olympia. He was a fireman, retired, and became a consultant for civil defense.
Oh, wow.
My mother was an RN.
Oh, so your mom was one?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
yes.
And was she in a hospital? Is that where your mom was, or?
No, she didn't work until until 1944, when the house, my folks separated and mother went back to work. And she was a graduate of St. Joseph's Hospital in 1919 in Bellingham.
Wow.
So
where did you get your training?
I started out at St. Joseph's, but I didn't finish. I left. I got sick and had to leave, and I went to work running an elevator at, no, it was, no, doesn't matter anyway, small store there in Bellingham. And a Mrs. Lane Brinson came around looking for recruits for the Navy, and I thought it was a good idea, so I went in February 22nd, 1944, I enlisted, and we didn't get taken until the end of February, and then we went on that all-woman troop train. From Seattle to Cheyenne, we were mixed with Army, and then they separated us, and they put us in that first all-woman troop train across to New York, and we got in New Jersey and bused to Hunter College, and we spent 6 weeks at Hunter College in New York. And then I got course school in Bethesda, Maryland, in April. It was hotter than the hubs of hell and all its glory in Washington. We're not used to it here. And then from there I went to Naval Hospital, Oakland. And I went on the OB ward, and that told me I didn't want that. And I had a friend that was a cubicle, and I said, why don't you become a lab tech? And it took 6 months, so I became a lab tech in 6 months. And I stayed that for the rest of my working career. I worked after I got out of the service as a lab tech. It was a good job. I liked to work, paid well, and it served its purpose. I liked the schools in the Navy. I wish they'd had other schools. I think I would have done better if I had had military schools instead of the, all this nonsense. You get all this information, and in the Navy you get what they want you, and then it's up to you to learn the rest.
Did you join the Navy out of a patriotic?
No, not particularly.
Just it was.
Well, we built military. I grew up in a military family, so the Navy wasn't anything startling to me. I did have a second thought when I walked under that archway at Hunter College. What did I do to myself this time? But it didn't bother me, and I had good times. I had no trouble with the discipline because I'd been under strict parents and sisters, so. What the Navy did to me was nothing compared to what they had done. And when I got to Naval Hospital in Oakland, it was perfect. My God, I got Liberty every other weekend.
Let me, yeah, one little piece of. There you go. Oh, there you go. So, Hunter College, that was where boot camp was.
They took it's a Jewish college. They're in the Bronx in New York, and they cleared out all the apartments because there's 5,000 of us girls there, and they cleaned out all the apartments, and we had 10 girls to an apartment, which was not the best of thing, but it worked. It served its purpose, and the college was cleared out. I don't think they had any college courses at their classes at the time we were there because we took pretty much all the buildings. And it was a nice school. It was good quarters. Cold, February, knee-deep in snow. And we had the armory right close by. So it was fine.
Uniform?
Oh, yes. We were, I guess it was about 3 weeks. Was it maybe 2 weeks before we got our uniforms? And then we were given $200, not to our hands. Yes, it was in there. I guess they gave it. And we went through a line and were measured, and we got 2 sets of dress blues. That we had to provide our own underwear. We got dress blues and shoes, I believe. Yeah, and that was all we got. And that had to come out of the $200. And you had to have alterations and stuff. Some of the girls had to have clothes alterated. Fortunately, I only had one arm that had to be alterated, but other than that, and a lot of the girls, they discovered when they got back there, they weren't old enough. See, we had to be 20 years old, either a college equivalent or a working background to go in. They were quite nasty about it. They were fussy about it. Now they're not, but they were then.
Now, was that just the Navy women?
Yes, Navy enlisted girls had to be 20. And we had to have, of course, a lot of them were professional women. I didn't realize how many. And, of course, some of them became officers, too, but not many of them. Teachers, I had a physiotherapist, occupational therapist, a weather girl from Seattle. We had one that painted glass eyes. A lot of them were specialties in certain fields that we had.
Now, did the men have to be?
No,
only the women.
Only the women, because we were new now. In 1942 is when I think they took the first girls. This was 44, and they didn't have facilities for us too well. Our barracks were fine after we got there, but at the beginning the girls had sea bags. Of course, now they allowed us 2 21-inch suitcases. All we were allowed, but it was fun. I mean, I don't remember ever getting too excited about it. I remember when Port Chicago blew up. I didn't know that's what happened, but I heard a heck of a racket, and they threw the klaxon on. The klaxon which is allowed, if you know anything about military, it's a loud horn over. They alert you. This was midnight, and they blew the klaxon. I got up and went and did my thing. Came back. I looked at my wife. What are they talking about? I got back into bed. Well, I woke up the next morning. Nobody was in the barracks with me because everybody had gone on this emergency. Not me, I'd gone back to bed. So I kind of quietly, eventually the ambulances that were brought back what they could, there wasn't too much coming back. It was because the people were pretty well destroyed. Came back, well, Mary, where were you? I said, I was in bed. How'd you get away with it? I said, don't talk, just shut up. We'll get through this. But most of the other times I was alert to a thing, but it was too early and I just was tired. And we worked 14-hour one day and 9 hours the other day, every other day. And every other weekend we were on port and starboard watches. We had Liberty, and our Liberty started Saturday at noon, and we didn't have to be back until Monday morning, I believe, at 7 o'clock.
And what did you do in that work time?
In the Liberty?
No, when you were working.
Oh, I was...
We'll get to the Liberty.
I was a hospital corpsman. I took care of patients. I was first went in as OB, which is the women who's not service women, the men's wives and families. We took care of them. We had wards of them. I think there were 70 or 80 patients on a ward. And OB was the delivery of the babies. That's what the picture was. Well, I didn't like it. So I eventually got into lab. That's what because I found a school was more intelligent to do. And that was 6 months I went to school and then graduated and then worked as a teacher there. We all, the women stayed behind naturally because every time we came, a man went to sea. That was the objection to us. We weren't too welcome most of the time because of that. But that's in our corpsmen, they went with the Marines, which wasn't a good duty either. But that's the way it worked. We trained them then after you became a thing that trained people, the men to be taken. They only took, at the time I went in, they took 8 men and 2 women in each class. So there was only 10 of us in each class going through at the time. So there wasn't too many of us and women in the lab. And we worked 7 to 7.
And you said the men weren't that excited to see you there.
No, they weren't too excited. They put up with us, of course, naturally. They had no choice in the matter. And we all got along very well.
And then, was this new for women corpsmen?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it was. And we'd had nurses, and they'd had the men were corpsmen. But it was new to the women in the Navy. Now, you had still, at that time, we were reservists. But at that time, we had a lot of regular Navy. And your regular Navy doctors weren't too pleased, or any of them weren't too pleased with us. Thought we were trying to rule. So we weren't trying to rule anything. We were trying to help. And I think we did in our own silly ways.
Now, it's interesting, because now you said you were a reservist.
Yes, that's all of us. We went in for a duration and 6 months was what the length of our enlistment was. And after the war was over, I was in about 6 months, and that's exactly what they said. Then we were discharged.
They said, thank you very much.
That's right.
Go back.
We got the rights of education. We got the rights of insurance. We got all the rights that we were supposed to have. But by that time now, the war had been on for a couple, 3 years, and they'd gotten used to us. Accepted us as we were. But in the beginning, it wasn't too easy. And the girls ahead of me, I'm sure it wasn't easy.
Now, were you, because you said you taught also, right?
Yeah, we were, everybody, when you finished school, then you were left in the lab to teach the next class that came along. You helped.
Now, were you teaching men that you knew were going off?
Yes, they all were. We knew that they were.
Not
all of them got to be go with the Fleet Marines. Some of them went independent, what they called independent duty. The sharp ones went to independent duty. And we had what we call V12, I believe. They were boys coming in, or girls both, coming in to be doctors, and they were starting their career, beginning their education. They spent so much time in the lab, as did the men aboard ships come in and spent the time in the lab, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, wherever they were given. And they had to learn fast so they could go back aboard ship and take care. And to the hospitals overseas they were trained. But certain hospitals did certain things. There was we had general patients. San Leandro had psychiatric, which was not too far from us. Each hospital had a different specialty. We had tuberculosis. We had a few. No, tuberculosis was our main thing. Wasn't the main, but it was one of them.
And were these soldiers coming back?
Sailors, yes.
Yeah.
This was Navy.
No, that's right. So you had sailors that had come back.
Oh, yeah. We picked them up in ambulances or buses at the docks, bring them in, and they were sorted out. We got a bunch of Dutch sailors one time, and then we were assigned. Some of the girls were assigned to see that nothing happened to them when they went on liberty. So their money was. Because they'd been with the Japs in, I think it was Iwo Jima. Was that where the mines were first, Iwo Jima?
Yeah.
Yeah, Iwo Jima. When they took that over, they brought them out.
The mines?
Yeah, where they had the Dutch sailors, had all those prisoners. Wasn't it Iwo Jima? It was one of where the mines were. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, the mines
Yeah, I think. Yeah, but anyway, wherever they were, where the Dutch sailors had been taken capture in the early part of the World War. Yeah, and they came. We got a load of them.
Basically, they came from Guadalcanal.
Oh, okay. None of them spoke too good English, so it was somebody had to
So were they in pretty sad shape then?
No. You
No,
take
most of them were dead.
well, yeah, but
Wow.
That's where they introduced the flame throwers in the caves,
Yeah.
and most of them just dead. But
Wow.
there were a few with bad burns.
yeah, but ours, the ones we got, were in good shape. There was nothing wrong
Were
with.
they?
Yes, and they got their new uniforms while they were there, and we had to look. It was completely different in our uniforms, but they got their uniforms. I guess they were with until they got. Of course, they had diseases, they had to be taken care of, and as soon as they were taken care of, then they were shipped to their own home ports. But it was a very fascinating life as far as you take time to think about it. Now, I didn't at the time. It was just one chore after another, and the days were long and the nights were short.
What was, and I know there wasn't an average day, but tell me a little bit of what you did during the day at work. What types
Well,
of...
in the lab, we did around 150, 200 patients, drawing blood on them, drawing specimens of urine, sputum, stool, whatever was required. And, of course, we had the eye, ears, nose, and throat. Some of the girls did that. There was, what was the other one? X-ray had their route. So that, and the lab was divided up in about 6 different divisions, so consequently, you were one day you were in bacteriology, the next day you were in hematology or urology or histology, whatever was required of you that day.
The point was basically to release a man to go
Right.
on the ship.
That's what our job was. It wasn't,
Because at that time, there was no chance of a woman
No.
going over into active...
well, that comes later.
Oh.
Yeah, down the stream.
Down the street. Now, I had wanted to go. Hawaii was as far as they were going to let us enlisted girls go. All right, so I signed up, went through the psychiatric treatment and the whole works, and got my shots, and came home. They said we could have 10 days home. There was, in the total, I think, eventually, there was 250 of us in that particular draft. Well, anyway, I came home, and the damn war was over. So I had to go back to Shoemaker, which was a shipping out point, and spent 6 weeks there, and they shipped me back where I came from, with a bunch of other ones. And then I finished the war eventually out at the Naval Hospital there in Oakland. And then I got sick and had to go down. They thought I had tuberculosis, and they sent me down to Corona. And I was there, like doctors say, I stayed there long enough, I'll get it. I think I was there about 4 or 5 weeks. And then they shipped me to San Francisco and discharged me. But no, I had planned to go to Hawaii. Yeah, I was kind of indignant about the fact that the war had to be over at that particular time. It could have at least wait until I got out to sea, to get over with, but it didn't. So I never did get to Hawaii.
When you were working the ward, was it so busy that you never got to talk to patients, or did you get to talk
Well,
to
the ones that I talked to, yeah, I talked to patients. We went out and drew blood. Mornings, if you worked the morning shift, you did the drawing in the lab. They were ambulatory, they could come in, but if you were on the 3 to 11 shift, you went to the wards to draw blood. And yes, I visited with a lot of them. And then I was also on call at night, and I remember I got called one night to do an alcoholic, and this man kid, I should say, was in a full body cast, and I said, how in the name of God did this happen to you? Where'd you get it? Well, I got called in, naturally. But eventually, he stayed there long enough for me to, you became acquainted with him. He got all the body casts, eventually got into things, and eventually got shipped out. But they were young. They were younger than we were. And we weren't exactly old age or anything, but they were 17, 18, 19-year-olds. All rates, all ranks, and you visit with them, yes. Enjoyed them, yes. But they were, what us girls said, another man. That's what we didn't need. We were surrounded with them. And they segregated, of course, the barracks, just naturally. And we had student nurses at that time. They were the barracks above us, and then us, then the colored sailors, then on down according to rank or rate that you were at. And we were about a mile from the gate, so we had a nice long walk up the hill, unless somebody fortunate would come by with a Jeep, take us up. But generally it was about a mile up the hill to our barracks from the main gate.
And the women corpsmen and the women nurses were...
The segregated, so they were rate rank, because the nurses are officers. The women weren't. We had a few officers, but not that many. And they had their special places too. And some lived off the base too.
Oh.
You know, they had enough money to pay for the rent, they lived off the base.
Was there different levels of respect for nurse versus corpsman, male, female?
Yes, to a certain extent, as there is in any military organization. You have your
officer nurses eat with the officers.
Yeah.
And they eat with the
yeah, the officers eat separate from the
You
enlisted.
bet there's a difference.
Wow.
I was sitting in the chow hall of about 4,000 one day at noontime, and I heard my name yelled across the chow hall, and I thought, oh, Lord, now who? It was a kid from home. He was a Marine, and he'd been wounded, and he knew I was there because we'd all gone to school together. And he said, didn't know whether he'd ever seen me or not. Well, he did. But eventually he got on the main gate, and eventually he married a girl from Port Chicago, and he now lives in Bellingham, and his wife has passed. She had polio, and she's passed away. But every time I think about some of the funny things, that was one of them, because he came across, well, you have to know him, but he came across the tables with loud, as if they doubt who I was before it was.
He was a loud person.
Yeah, he was a loud person, and then, of course, I don't embarrass easy, so I didn't worry too much about it. Then I got called down the main gate another time. The Army called because my husband was killed, and I didn't realize you were supposed to apply for pensions and insurances and all that. I was being taken care of, and I figured that was it. I wasn't going to worry about the rest of it. Well, they came and yelled at me on the phone, Mary, get dress blues and come down. So I had to put my dress blues on and go back down. And I had to go down into town with them in a car being yelled at all the way because I should have done this. It should not have had to happen this way. Well, they don't tell you everything. You know, they assume you know something, and if you're not, at 20, you don't know a heck of a lot of anything. At least I didn't. But it settled itself down, the world went. And I had quite a few of my classmates. See, I graduated Mount Baker High School, and we were a small high school, so we knew everybody. And a lot of our kids that were my age went in the service. So a lot of them would come into port there in San Francisco or Oakland or what was the other one? Doesn't matter anyway. Fraser Island. And they'd come and they'd visit, you know, and I'd go down to the gate and visit with them for her, make arrangements to go out and have dinner with them afterwards.
Now, your husband was in the service?
Yes, he was. He was a tail gunner on an B-17, and he was killed with flak over Munich. He was from Bellingham, too.
So were you married?
In the service, but we'd gone together in high school. We got married in the service. And, in fact, it's in there. They'll find it in there. And then he was killed, and so I stayed in the service. I would have liked to have made it a career, but I didn't. But it was a trying time again, but they gave me afternoon duty, so I didn't have the full shift that I'd had if I stayed on days.
So you were already in the service, and he was in the service when you got married?
Mm-hmm. He was Air Force, and he wasn't Air Force then, excuse me, he was Army Air Corps.
Yeah.
And he was in the England, was where he was stationed.
So did they have any, was it okay for military to marry military?
Oh, yes.
No, so
we didn't go, the enlisted didn't socialize with the officers. We didn't, date or anything. At least not if they knew it. But, no, it wasn't. There was no reason for it. We had enough of the other. Because there's only about, 250, 300 waves. And then the student nurses there at the hospital, we had 5,000, 6,000 men, so you really didn't have to worry too much if you were looking for a date.
Now, did you ever hear, I talked to a wave yesterday, and she said that there were some negative connotations of the waves, where they said the waves, they had created the waves to sleep with the officers.
That was not what happened.
I know that wasn't what happened, but
it did. What I mean, that wasn't why we were there to replace the men. That was why we were 20 instead of 17. They're making the mistake now of putting the girls in at 18. They're not ready for what they're going to face. Because you do have a challenge there. And you do have some problems. But considering the amount of girls we had very little problem in that department. I know one time there was a fetus found in the sewers, and they had us all hauled in. Well, it wasn't us at all. It had been somebody in the OB department that had supposed to have taken it and put it into the lab and didn't. It went down to the thing. There was some error on all parts. We were all apologized for. But, yes, we were accused. This was what was bad. We were accused of everything. When not really, I'm sure there was a few that did it. I'm not saying we were perfect. But as a majority, no. We were not created. We were created to work, and we did work. At least the ones I knew did. Now, what happened since then, I don't know, but because I'm not very delighted with the results of the girls now.
Well, I know that wasn't while you were there.
No.
One of the waves had said.
Oh, I'm sure they did, depending what branch of whether she was a yeoman or storekeeper or striker, which they never did get a rate. Getting a rate was almost impossible. We used to laugh among ourselves and say, the only way you're going to get a rate is sleep with somebody. And so help me, when you got your rate, you had to say, deny it to the thing, and it wasn't true. Because we took the test just like the men did. But there was only so many openings. So consequently, unless you were spectacular, you were not rated. You didn't get your third class.
And I heard they kind of did all sorts of things to prevent women from...
No, we never had any trouble. Not where I was at, but I'm sure they did. No, we had no problem at all. If the girls, I think maybe some of them might have talked too much. Drank too much, whatever it was. But as a general rule, no, I never had any problem.
I just need to move the microphone a little bit on here. Did, and you started to get to a little bit free time, liberty.
Yeah.
What did all you...
What did us girls do? Well, we carefully, there was generally 4 or 5, but generally 4 of us would go off, or 2 of us. San Francisco was a marvelous liberty town. We had the theater, we had the opera, we had movie theaters, we had nightclubs, and San Francisco accepted women. We didn't have to be escorted. So many towns in those years, a woman just didn't dare go into a place like that. Well, we did because we came in as a group. Now, they had hotel rooms for us. I think Mark Hopkins, all the big hotels, we could go in, and for $5 we got a bed, and we maybe shared a room, but we had separate beds in these rooms, and we were given certain hotels we could stay in. We were given certain places we could go. There was places we couldn't go, which made good sense, kind of like Mother Hen, but they had a reason for it, or they wouldn't have done it, because Frisco had at that time what was now is accepted, wasn't accepted in those years, so we stayed out of those places. No, it was a marvelous liberty town. Oakland was a good liberty town.
Did you go in uniform?
Oh, yes. We never could be without. We never had civilian clothes. Oh. We had to have, we were in uniform. The dress blues is what we generally wore, or where he was at, they had dress whites, but we didn't have that. We had the seersucker uniforms and blue smocks for the working in the wards, and the girls that were office had the seersucker uniforms. We wore, most of us wore our skirts and white blouses and our jackets were full dressed when we went to work. We took our hats off and jackets off when we worked, but we never took our hats off when we were out. That's why we always learned to comb our hair around our hats. Put the hats on first, comb our hair, and then put the rest of the clothes on.
Did you get the same respect? I know I always hear the story about men in uniform, and if they went in to have a meal, somebody always wanted to buy them. There was this patriotic thing. Did women get that same type?
Oh, I think to a certain extent, but not really. When I was in boot camp in New York, we were there for the Easter of '44, and we marched down Fifth Avenue, and the Protestant girls went to a church, the Catholic girls went to a church. The Jewish girls had their fiesta before, so they didn't get to go with us. And at the church I went to, we had a breakfast. They were very nice to us. They served us breakfast after Mass. And we had the center aisles of St. Pat's Cathedral right straight down the center. We marched in, sat down, and marched out. And then they took us to the back part of the church, which we later went not too many years ago to see where it was. In the back part, we went back in there, back to one of the altars and had our breakfast. And it was a thrill. It really was. I enjoyed it. Of course, I like things like that. And I went to the Statue of Liberty, and the other girls went to the dancing girls there.
The Rockettes?
Rockettes. The other girls went to Rockettes, and then we met at the skating rink there, and RCA building there, and we couldn't go up in the bar because we were boots. Had to wait until we were things, so we didn't go up in the bar. But a taxi cab picked us up because we had prearranged it, and there was 6, I think, of us piled in that cab, and they took us to a place, a restaurant, and that's the first time I'd ever seen a smorgasbord. And the centerpiece was a huge egg shaped of cheese, made out of cheese, a huge egg. I never seen anything like that. Well, from where I came from, we didn't have that. First place, we didn't eat out that much. And then the second place, we didn't have those elegant restaurants. Bellingham didn't have those elegant restaurants. If they did, I was not exposed to them. So I really think, and I know I went around to Saks and Macy's and all those big stores and sent a package from each one of them home to my mother, so she'd have one from each store, because she was quite enchanted with this whole thing.
Wow. Was your mom proud of you?
I think so. You know, so my brother was in the service too. And then my sister's husband was in the service, as was mine. So she had a 4-star flag. I think so, because we had Dad. So the service didn't mean probably as much to us as it did to other people, because we were used to the uniforms. I grew up with them, you know, because Dad was an enlisted man, and we knew our place and stayed in it. Dad eventually made chief, and so it wasn't anything new to us.
And you said your mom and dad separated?
Oh yeah, they divorced, yeah.
So was your dad proud of you?
I think so, in his own way. In his own way.
Well, when I came along, he was sure as hell proud of her, because he wouldn't hardly let us in the house.
I know how that goes.
Yeah.
Well, see...
He always would look at us and say, what the hell do you want?
Well, see, Bruce and I went to high school together, so we knew each other as friends.
Yeah.
Long before any of this had happened, before the war and everything. And being a small school and being a neighborhood that we were lived in, we knew these people, and they were, like Mother said, they were part of the family, coming and going. She didn't think much about it, you know. Dad got a little upset occasionally, but they were long-legged glutes.
That was the nature of the beast.
It was him, not particularly anything anybody did wrong or did.
A lot of the guys that used to have parties, and we'd go there, and he entertained us all, you know, with his remarks.
Well, of course, you have to remember the time. I started high school in 1938. The West Coast was not out of the Depression yet, even though the war had started in Europe in 37. 38, we were still poverty. I mean, well, it wasn't poverty. Well, I guess we were poor and we didn't know we were poor. Let's put it that way. And so when these parties we had at our house, some brought us a bag of sandwiches, somebody brought a cake, you know, and the kids gathered because we were out in the country. We were 10 miles out of Bellingham, so it wasn't exactly on the super highway by no means. But it was a different world than it is now. We didn't actually crawl out of depression until, 42, 43 is when I began to see, more money around. And then, of course, there was nothing to spend it on. So they had to wait until, 46, 47. And you talked about women. Yes, it made a difference. The women went to work, left families at home to shuffle for themselves. It was a change, a radical change in this country.
Did that change continue
Yes.
after the war? Or?
Yes. Yeah, most households have been two supporters, as far as I know, because I've always worked off and on them since I've been married.
So when you were done with the service, it wasn't like...
I was done with the service on Friday afternoon. I went to work Monday morning for a doctor I had worked for in the hospital. He had gotten back. He was a Stanford Lane man, and he had a lab in San Francisco, and he needed somebody to cover for a few months until his girl got back. And so I covered for him there, and then I went on to Woodland, California, and worked there for about 6 months until I had a call from home, and I went home, and then that was the end of my travels. But no, most of us had got jobs instantly, because lab techs can get jobs. It doesn't matter whether you're 4 years or 2 years or what. In those years, you didn't have to be licensed as you do now.
Well, I just know a lot of the women that went and became Rosie the Riveters
Yes.
and did some of the other stuff. When the war came to an end, they said, "Thank you very much. We've got the men coming back now. Go back to the house and take care of your..."
Yeah, but they didn't.
Yeah,
They didn't. That was the thing. They'd used to that income coming in. And we all did. And of course, we were all a party. But when the war was over, we were an entirely different class of people again. We partied. We were outgoing. We had won our freedom, that we didn't have to take some of the things that we had to take before. And I'm not saying it was good, but that is the way it is. And you'll notice that those women went home, but they also went out and found other jobs. In fact, one of my friends went down to the shipyard. She came up from the Midwest. She went to the shipyard to be a sweeper. Yes, that's what she was going to be, a sweeper. She got there, they discovered she had taken a business course in 1919, and she could type and take shorthand. Well, she ended up being the secretary of the admiral before she was through there at the naval shipyard there in Bremerton. So they did go on. Maybe some of them stayed home, but the majority of them went on and worked. And it has always been, it isn't a good thing, I don't think, maybe, but it's the way it is. Now you have no choice in the matter but to work. You know.
Do you think if World War II hadn't have happened, I mean, was World War II, do you think, the result of that change, or the creation of that change?
Creation. It was an absolute, because they had to have somebody work here, and the men are gone. They had no choice. The shipyards, the defense plants, all those places had no choice but to hire the women, because there was nothing else to hire.
Yeah, a lot of them flew planes, you know.
Yeah,
Boeings.
Yeah.
Well, they were the winds.
England.
They
That's
got,
all they did.
and they got no credit. They didn't. In fact, they just recently got credit for that.
Just recently.
Yeah.
Worse yet, because I talked to Barbara London, who was one of the very first, and if they crashed and died,
Yep.
they wouldn't pay
No.
for their funeral.
No.
The girls had to.
That's right.
They were on their own and they were paid a wage,
Uh-huh.
but not waves. The waves weren't flying.
Yeah.
No.
Civilians.
No,
But
but
did you get the GI Bill? Was that?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
So you had.
we had the full rights of everything.
Everything.
It was nothing. I met some of those girls from England, and we were at the Pepsi-Cola had a USO for us girls in San Francisco that was strictly for girls, because we had the facilities there for us to go and rest and what have you. And I met someone that come over for a reason, because at the time San Francisco became United Nations. The first United Nations was held in San Francisco, so we had a lot of all sorts of things drifting in and out, and it was kind of fascinating if you happened to be lucky enough to see them, which I was occasionally. And they were saying that now England was better than we were, because they had their girls flying. We didn't. Now I guess we do now, but we didn't then. Again, we were the beginning of the women in the service, the Army and the Navy, and at the time I went in, the Marine Corps had only 7 billets. Well, I was not any of them interested in me at all. The Navy had the most billets for us, most jobs, because they wanted me to be a photographer. Well, that was not what I had in mind. And there was another one. She wanted to be a yeoman. They had something else for her. And we sat in the steps and bawled for weeks until they finally gave us what we wanted. You know, because they weren't going to get what they wanted out of us, because I had used photography as a hobby, but I was not interested in going to Corpus Christi and flying around in airplanes, laying on my stomach, taking pictures of things. That was not what I had in mind at all. So each person had something different in mind when they went. I checked the Army, but I didn't like the Army. I didn't like what they had, but that doesn't mean there was anything wrong with it. I just didn't care for it.
Now, we had a lady yesterday in here, and which was all news to me. There was a part of history that didn't seem to get recorded. She was a lesbian in the
Yes,
service. Were you aware of any of that, or?
I don't know if I was too dumb.
Never heard of it.
I knew, no, we had them because of
I didn't know it.
we had conscientious objectors in the corpsmen. You know, if they were in the army or the Navy and said they were conscientious objectors, we got them in the medical because the medical took care of itself. It had its own everything, garbage, everything. They were separate from the rest of the Navy. But as far as lesbians, I don't remember. I know someone got accused of it, but I never had dealings with it.
And that's what she said. It was interesting because
Oh,
she
yeah.
kind of danced around the subject for quite a while before I really
Yeah.
understood what she was saying.
Was she a lesbian herself?
Yes, she was.
Yeah.
Which I finally found out.
Yeah.
But she said she'd been in Hawaii and she was with one of her other waves at that time.
Yeah.
And the wave said, do you know what a prevert is? And she went, oh, I know where she was going. You mean pervert? And the gal said yes. And she said, was somebody talking to you and asking you? And she said, yes, the FBI was asking me because apparently they would try to get rid of lesbians and blacks and...
Well, the blacks hadn't come in when I was there. I know they threatened.
Blacks were service people in the kitchen.
Yeah, well, we didn't
cooks
get...
and making beds for the officers.
They were...
That was it. They were in no part of the Navy even.
Well,
So were they in the service and they just gave them those
No,
jobs, or they were
no.
civilians?
No, they went into service, and that's all they could get. Because at one time, the Navy wouldn't even let them in, and they went in... They have all, but the black girls, that was something else. I was towards the end of my service, the war was over, and I was doing my 6 months too. And they were talking about going to have colored girls in. Oh, I tell you, the world was going to hell in a horse and wagon. Well, we had put up with the Jews. That was another. We had several of those. And they were calling each other kites and everything else. It was lovely. But again, you accepted it. You didn't. As I say, I didn't get too excited about it. That was it, and that's so what. But when the colored girls, well, what difference does it make? Well, it does. The girls from Georgia, the girls from the South. Oh, that's terrible. Well, see what happens. We'll see. Well, they did eventually got in, and there was nothing we could do about it. And I don't see why there was no defensive against them. They too have their problems, the same as we did.
Now, being from out here, had you ever met colored people?
Yes.
Oh, you had. Okay.
Well, see, when we were when Dad was in the service, we were in California, San Pedro, Alameda, that area. We had Japanese then, and that was a prejudice problem, And up here we had Indians, So I think Western people have a totally different aspect of life than the rest of the world, especially if you live down in the booms. You don't get too excited one way or the other.
Well, and a lot of people at that time, you were living life, you were surviving.
That was the
so
words.
People were people.
That's right. I don't remember having my folks ever criticized, other than my dad did, on the Japs, because being a Coast Guard, when the Navy went out to target practice in those years, it did. And the Coast Guard would have to go out and lay off anchor, away from, but watch. And they'd have to bring in the Japanese, because at that time the Japanese, of course, we've had this Battle of Japan for many years, and Billy Mitchell, you read his story. So consequently, he'd come home with ranting about them, and their boats and their little radios and all this stuff that the Coast Guard had to haul in and bring. So I guess Japanese, but I don't remember having any prejudice against them because they were in school with us.
Huh.
And when kids were in school with your classmates, you didn't worry too much about their color or their...
Well, in the high school, you only had one Indian, I think, or two.
No, I had more than that. So you don't socialize with them.
I think the whole city of Bellingham, as far as I'm concerned, only had one black family.
Yeah.
And that's about like Olympia today.